Welcome back to Q Source. Thrilled to have our guest with me today, Chuck Klein, Goose. Goose in the house. Good to see you, Goose.
Hey, it's good to see you, Money Pit, man. Thanks for inviting me out here, and I'm looking forward to this. This is my first time ever doing a podcast, but I'm excited. So, let's jump into it.
Well, I know our PAX will be thrilled to see your face, and Mr. Q Source himself. I don't think we could really do this without getting your wisdom, getting your face and your voice involved, and so we're an F4 foundation leadership development process. And immediately when I read this chapter, I knew I had to get Goose on. If you sat at the Q Source table with Goose, you know he's had so much experience and wisdom in the leadership arena, and especially this topic that I knew to serve it justice, we needed to get him to tell a story and really help us. So, Goose, you come from the armed services, the Navy world as a Navy pilot, long career there, and now you're back training fighter pilots again. I'm not from that world. And so those of us in the civilian world, I don't think we understand how important leadership is the way that it was really probably ingrained in you. And I think that we get the most out of this discussion just by teeing up a conversation on the tables about the importance of developing yourself as a leader and the importance of being intentional about how you develop those around you. So just wherever your heart, your mind went when you thought about this, a story, just share with our PAX.
Oh boy. I think this is, if we're not careful, there's all sorts of rabbit holes, and I think it's a mile wide and an inch deep kind of thing. But I think it just sort of comes either from, you're just sort of in, when you join the military, like this, that's part of the indoctrination. Like leadership is sort of, it's actually part of, turning a civilian into a member of any military, whether it's a U.S. Armed Forces or pretty much anywhere. There has to be an indoctrination process, which is you basically turn it's all about me mentality into it's all about us, and it's all about the team, and it's all about things like the mission and words that possibly don't have a lot of meaning maybe in the civilian side of it really become real important to this group of like-minded people. How that's done is difficult, and it's not something that I think that when you think of the military, some of it's over 200 years old. The different branches, some of them are over 200 years old. That's not something that just sort of popped out of we look back on history, and we look at like what were the goods, what were the bads of other organizations, military or civilian. And I think that really is part of leadership. It doesn't matter how big the organization is. You can start off with just yourself, or you can get to giant organizations. But you say like, hey, how do we get better? And what are some things that I have seen work in the past? And I think that's a really, from my own personal experience, that seems to be something that, frankly, leadership is not some thing that there's not really this there's innovation in it, but not really. Like it really is like, hey, what worked in the past with these people? What are some things I saw that I admired with these people? Why did I admire them? And then you just sort of start latching on to those kind of things, and you start learning, and if you're there's certain people out there that are just interested in, if you ever been with somebody that's a good leader, you just kind of naturally start to want to either be them or just figure out how they click. And that's all it really is. You start off with, one-on-one personal interactions, and then, whether military or civilian, as that will start to grow. And again, if you're sitting there watching somebody and you're like, man, I really like the way he or she conducts herself. And then you see that person interact with maybe a small group of people, 3 to 5 people. And then, as things progress, or maybe just the opportunities you see, maybe that person is now interacting with 25 or 30 or 100 or 5,000 or whatever. That's part of a human intuition of saying, I want to be like that person, or why can they have so much charisma and they can gather such a team and guide this large or small organization to achieve something, that maybe I admire.
I want to jump in here. So
sure.
I love the way that you simplified that. This book they've got a formula, they've got a framework and a structure, and I think you and I both subscribe to it and we agree with it. But I love the way how you you simplify it to say it's as simple as recognizing the leaders around you, recognizing what success looks like around you, and paying attention. Right?
Yeah.
Like I think that's a great place to start, is knowing you can formalize this in the way that you look at leadership, but you just start to pay attention. Who's leading well? Who you drawn to, and who's got success? I want to throw this quote at you. In the business world, we love this quote by John Maxwell. It says that everything rises and falls on leadership. But I
Okay.
bet you that means something even so much more in the world that you come from. Everything rises and falls on leadership.
I don't think so. I think there is, that's a fantastic quote, and when it kind of comes down to it, it doesn't matter if you're whatever profession you're in. And I think I will kind of keep it maybe at that level of discussing professions. If you want to get into other organizations like private things, but like when it comes to keeping this within the context of a profession. So the military is some people don't really realize it's a profession of violence. Versus real estate is a profession of moving houses or locations or that kind of stuff. So it's all confined within the aspect of your profession. And
Yeah,
again,
but I think that you experienced the stakes were higher where you came from,
sure,
right?
yeah,
And a bad leader had a chance to make a bigger negative impact if you weren't careful. And so developing leaders was so important in the military world because people's lives are on the line of the decisions made, right?
okay, yeah. I agree, and then I will also kind of almost disagree with that. Is you could be in the profession of like the decisions you make in your for you build
Mm-hmm.
your impact of the decisions and the way you lead that organization still has a very strong direct impact on your family and on your employees. And
Absolutely.
so, yeah. And so like when it, like life, death, like, no, but yeah, like kind
Well,
of,
I think the point that I'm really trying to
yeah,
make that I want the PACs to understand, because you're really
sure.
agreeing with me, is that the stakes are high in every industry and can be high in different organizations, but it makes leadership that important,
Yeah.
right? And so the higher the stakes, the more important that leadership is. And we're talking in the context of developing leaders. And I want everybody to understand, like, leaders aren't born,
Yeah.
they're formed. And we need to be intentional about developing ourselves as leaders. And we need to be intentional about developing those around us, because the decisions that people under us make as leaders impacts us. And
Oh,
so
absolutely.
developing all of ourselves and being intentional about that process, I think, is the power of what we're doing here as a community through Q Source.
Sure. I think maybe I'll kind of take a different swing at this one.
Mm-hmm.
I think with the military, there comes some times where you will make a decision or you will tell somebody, I think with everything, and you and I've talked about this before, which is leadership is you're going to tell somebody or make somebody do something they don't want to do, but they
Yeah.
understand either why they
Yeah.
want, maybe they understand, maybe they're not, but ultimately, here we are in the status quo. I need you to go do this. You might not like it, but here's why it's going to happen. Now in the military, I think that there is a point where I'm like, yeah, I can order you to go take that hill, and you could lose your life doing that. Or hey,
Yeah.
I can tell you to go fly this airplane when you think it's illogical. It's an illogical decision to go fly this airplane, and I say you have to go do this, because if you don't, this could happen or this could happen, something really terrible.
And
And
you as
so,
a leader, you're entrusting a lot when you send someone below you off on a mission, or you send them out with a multi-million-dollar airplane, and
yep,
there's consequences associated. So it makes that development process probably really important, that if you've trained them or not. Is this someone
absolutely.
that I've trained well, that I can trust to go execute on my behalf, on our unit's behalf, and
Yep,
people come back safely, right?
absolutely. And then I think there's also an aspect of, I think there might be, I know the Army and the Air Force have this sort of, but the Navy's very strong on, like ultimately, if I was the commanding officer of a squadron, I'm ultimately responsible for every action that happens in that squadron, no matter what. And so you see that a lot with like if ships, when they're driving their ships around, if they run aground and the captain was asleep, like the captain has to sleep, or they should. But if that ship runs aground, they will go back and fire the captain, even if he or she did everything right, because ultimately you're still responsible for that ship. And usually the way that lineage goes is they say, well, you trained that person, they messed up, it's on you because you're the commanding officer, and that thank you for your service, but you relieved of duty. So yeah, that's kind of the relationship, and it's a daily battle. And there's all sorts of circumstances where you're like, yeah, you have to make a decision saying, do I trust this person to take this airplane and do something very dangerous and potentially lethal? Every day. And you think about it. Sometimes you don't, sometimes once you gain trust, like you start to say like, all right, that person's got it, I'm not too worried about it. But especially in the military, where so many dynamic things happen, and the weather can change, and the adversary can change, and the adversary has a vote on how we do things. Is
Right.
just because on Tuesday I was like, yeah, I totally trust this this organization and this person because this is the parameters that we've set up, and I've set up all these tripwires. Well, on Thursday, maybe something new and unexpected has happened, and that we have to adapt, and we have to not necessarily start over, but hey, we have to talk about that. Let's chat about it.
Yeah, I mean, really, you're telling story and giving context behind the heading that I find on page 22, which says the LDP, or the leadership development process, depends upon decentralized execution to a central purpose.
Absolutely.
Ultimately, when you're entrusting a leader below you to do something on your behalf, you are you're depending on them to execute on decentralized power. You're decentralizing the power to them that they would execute on this agreed upon central purpose. And not all of us are in massive organizations the size of the Navy, but as I shared before, sometimes the stakes can even be higher in a small business, because if my company of 15, one person can screw everything up really quickly.
Yeah.
Right. And our packs might find themselves in different size organizations, or even a family. There's a lot of trust that you're extending to your team members and people that you're asking to get involved with you, which puts the impetus on us as leaders to say, have I trained this person for what I'm asking them to do?
Yeah. That's called, in the military, we use a term called commander's intent, which
Mm-hmm.
is, hey, I'm going to sit down with you all, and I can't tell you every single situation you're going to run into. But as a leader of whatever size organization, maybe it's a crew, maybe you're just one of 4 or 5 people in an airplane. Maybe you're in charge of an entire department, which could be 150 people. Maybe you're in charge of an entire aircraft carrier, which is 5,000 people. You receive guidance, or you should receive guidance, called commander's intent from the person that's above you. And you say, okay, that's what my technically it's my boss, but it's also my leader. And that leader
Mm-hmm.
will sit there and say, like, here's my intent for this huge organization that you're a part of. But here's your part.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to tell you what to do. I need you to study my intent, but then I need you to kind of come up with your own intent, and then that way you can tell that all the way down to the younger sailor. And for us, like I kind of would walk around every once in a while, and it's really difficult, especially with the big, the more I was an 05, so I was a commander in the Navy, but I would walk around a lot of times and talk to our youngest sailors, our enlisted rank, the youngest are usually 18, 19 years old, and just kind of see if they understood where they were and what their purpose was and how they aligned, how we could get everything into strategic alignment, or hey, just do you understand you're part of this piece.
Mm.
And that came from my intent, where I knew what my boss needed across the entire strike group. I knew that here's my part. I had this kind of an airplane, and I could do this kind of mission sets, and here's my piece of the puzzle, and I understood that. But I have to tell my crews, okay, well, here's our rules of engagement. Here's how we're going to conduct ourselves. Here's what you're allowed to do. Here's maybe not necessarily what you're allowed to do. And that I don't want to get into how the Navy and the Air Force differ in the way we think, but generally I'll tell you, like, here's what we need to do. as long as you don't violate that, like I'm going to let you have a lot of flexibility up to a certain point when it comes to the books and the rules, especially rules of engagement under peacetime rules or versus under the law
Yeah.
of war.
You said a lot right there, and there's something I want to make sure that everybody caught.
Sure.
This man's a leader's leader. I mean, did you hear this part of Goose's story? He's a commander, but he didn't stay sat on his perch ordering dictates from on high. In his free time, the leader got off the command and went down amongst the troops to see how are they doing, do they understand? Never just assuming that that everybody knew what to do, but taking that leadership development process on himself to make knowing that the more that everybody in the organization knew what they were doing, the better the organization could do, which means the better the things that he was responsible for do. So that's the challenge I want for you, Pax, to think about when you think about this chapter. Do you just sit on your perch, hand down dictates, or are you a leader's leader like Goose, who will get down and get amongst the people that are on your team to check in to make sure that they understand, what their purpose is and the alignment they have? Goose, I've got this leadership quote that I live by in my leadership, and it goes like this: the leader's success is in the hands of his team.
Oh, yeah.
But the team's success is the leader's responsibility.
Yep. 100%. I think you'll find, at least in my experience, if you're a leader and you're not getting down into, the folks on the bottom level, and first of all, trying to explain to them like what is their little piece of this big puzzle, what do they contribute, and because you'll be surprised. Like I think that's in the military. I think that's in the civilians, that there's going to be people out there that are like, I'm just here for the paycheck and I don't really understand what my part is. Well, if I can sit there and start to have like a genuine conversation with that person and be like, well, that's fine, but here, let me tell you about this. Like, you are actually doing this, spreadsheet, and you probably don't think this is a big deal, but I actually take that to my boss, and my boss sees this every 3 days, and we make decisions based off of this. All of a sudden, now they have buy-in to the organization. So that's one thing. The other thing is that if you're just a good person and you go down and give a genuine, like, hey, how are things going? And it's not just like, all right, I didn't really want an answer. I was just saying that nicely. Like, take time to sit there and have interactions with people and start to, hey, do they have a family? Hey, what kind of things are they struggling? I used to tell my junior officers, I said, you should know your people well enough to when you ask how they're doing and they give you an answer that is off, you're able to recognize that. Like, that is, you're always going to get maybe a kind of a smart aleck response from some people. But even those people, like, if you're used to getting a smart aleck response from that person, all of a sudden they say it in a different tone. Take that extra 10 or 15 seconds to be like, no, man, seriously, like, how are you, like, you okay? Or like something going on? If you were able to tell that difference, I think that's where ultimately, like, that's where morale comes from. And so as a leader, one of the things is, hey, we have goals, we have ambitions. Hey, we all want to get on the same sheet of music. But then if you're not the person that goes down there and gets to know people on a, not necessarily a daily basis, but like for whatever level you are in the organization, go down there and say hello to the troops and be like, hey man, how things going? Or, hey, I heard your truck broke down the other day. Like, just have a conversation with people and treat them like a human being. That will meet some fundamental needs that they have as a person. Yeah. And all of a sudden, that is how you start to change morale, especially if you have a situation where morale is maybe a little bit low.
Yeah, I love it. That harkens back to our last episode with Globetrotter, and he really made the point that humans have this desire for connection, yeah. and a leader needs to not only leverage that but steward that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Yeah.
So we won't go too deep on this 4 steps, but I just want to read them off to you. And if there's any one of these that you have a story for or have meant something to you, they give the 4 steps of the LDP. If you haven't gone through the Q source material, the last section of Q source goes deep into these, and there's a chapter for each. But the LDP leadership development process is 4 steps. Step 1 is schooling. Step 2 is apprenticeship. Step 3 is opportunity, and step 4 is failure. Which one of these has been crucial to your growth as a leader, but also something that was important as you developed other leaders?
Oh, it's failure. Yeah, that one's pretty. That's pretty easy. But understanding that it is a building process, you can't jump those steps. But I have loved schooling. I think either the military makes you go to a bunch of classes, but taking the ownership on yourself and starting to read books. There's 1,000 books out there that are just so good. Either biographies. Abraham Lincoln there's a bunch of good books about Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, but then also more that kind of gives you examples, and those books are full of times those men, and I use those men specifically, where they failed, and you look and say like, okay, like that, it's part of the process. But then there's apprenticeship. But really, is the most difficult, I think, is opportunity and being able to find a situation where you're like, wait a minute, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for leadership, because I think it's so easy to overlook something just because it didn't match your exact plan or the exact thoughts you had in your mind. But I mean, it really is like the old, hey, when God closes a door, he opens a window kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You just need to be able to look for that. And then once you get into there, understanding that, yes, you will fail. And I have failed so much. And I'm lucky to be alive, to be honest with you, just because of the way aviation is. And it's such a difficult teacher. But failure is, you have to fail because it's inevitable. And it's not so much what you failed at. It's how did you respond to failure? And we, especially in the aviation community, I almost kind of said like we don't set people up to fail, but it's almost like unheard of not to fail, and that's what I was asked about that when I was being interviewed as an airline pilot. Like, tell me about a failure and tell me how you responded. We all fail. Like,
Yeah.
they want to hear how you failed and see like, hey, what did you learn and how do you respond?
And failure's hard, but I'll tell you what, as a leader, I think it's harder for people to watch other people fail than it is for them to fail themselves.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not because we're mad at someone failing. Oftentimes we can't help ourselves. The empathy inside of us steps in normally as parents, for sure, but also with our team. And especially if someone on your team is about to make a mistake with dollar signs on the end, right? That it's hard to let someone fail. We want to step in. We want to stop them from failing. We want to stop from losing money. We don't want them to be embarrassed and humiliated. But the thing that we've got to embrace as leaders is if we really are committed to their development, we're going to have to let them. We just have to create a loving, supportive environment that allows them to fail gracefully and learn from that failure.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point. I don't have a ton of experience in the financial or monetary failure, like watching someone fail when it comes to money. And that's just an interesting thing I said there. But I do have a ton of experience of watching students in the simulator or in the airplane, and you have to have, I don't want to say you have to have, but a great instructor, possibly a leader, but is to be able to have the wisdom to know they're making a mistake and knowing that they will learn so much more from that mistake. However, again, in my profession of aviation, is that mistake going to kill us? And that is a really treacherous place of knowing, and you as an instructor or as a leader being like, okay, I've reached my comfort level. And I think if we're not careful, we're going to go into the realm of, breaking airplanes, killing people.
Yeah.
Okay. And so having those margins of error, being like, okay, here's my line in the sand where I'm not going to let this person go past this because now it's going to endanger me. So maybe there's something in there along the similar lines of finances. So
yeah, I mean, I think as a leader, when you watch your people fail, I think you have to see it as an investment in their future, an investment in your future, knowing that that failure is going to be required for them to go to their next level.
Yeah.
And hopefully you've developed a relationship that you'll be able to see them rise to that level, where you'll be able to see that as an investment. Well, Gustav, we're going to need to wrap up here. I love this conversation. I hope that you'll be willing to join us later this year on another couple episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. This has
of
been
Q
a ton of
Source.
fun.
So Goose is up, and tell everybody where you're at now, that and whether you landed softly, and do they have F3 up there?
Yeah, so moved up here about 2 weeks ago to Virginia Beach. And I'm working as I'm a contractor and as an instructor with the U.S. Navy, and working with Delta Airlines to do some commercial stuff there as well. They do have F3 up here. It's different, and I think that's a kind of a fun, or it's sort of an interesting thing to see how they do things a little bit differently, but in the grand scheme of things, they use all the same terminology, and all the exercises are called the same. And it ends. They reiterate, or they emphasize all the same things. There's circles of trust, and definitely a fitness fellowship and faith aspect to it up here. So it's good to see, and that's I think we're in a powerful organization that can really do a lot of good in the world.
That's great. Well, love to see your face. Great to hear your voice. Awesome to hear your stories. I know that the PAX will be glad that you joined us. And next time you're down in our area, I hope you give everybody a big blast so that we can catch a workout with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us for this episode of Q Source. We'll see you at the table. See you next week.